everybody. Welcome back to Psychedelics Weekly. This is Joe Moore, joined by David Drapkin, Director of Education over here. How are you doing today, David?
Yeah, I'm doing good. Thanks, Joe. Lovely to be here. First time you and me doing Psychedelics Weekly. I love how it's kind of spicing up each week.
Yeah, I'm loving the spontaneity. The organizing is a little chaotic, but I love it, actually. And I love that the whole team, or a lot more of the team, is going to get a voice on here. It's going to be really great. And hopefully we can give more folks voices as well. I guess before we get rolling, what do we have going on our side, David? I guess as we're recording on December 7th, you and the team did a bunch of work to launch Vital. So applications are now open again. Anything you want to say about Vital?
Oh, I'm going to be honest with you, Joe. This is my favorite part of the year because I get to speak to, 150, 200 students around the world that are just beautiful people doing amazing things that want to change the world, that, they're really ready for this next big step. They want to be part of a community and they just feel great resonance with what we're doing. And so specifically, I've had two beautiful students I've spoken to, one in Kathmandu, Nepal. I won't mention their name. Like a mental health counsellor, who's doing amazing work in Kathmandu, that wants to, help around cannabis and psychedelic treatment becoming an accepted part of the culture there. And then I had a call just now with somebody who, we're offered a scholarship from our diversity fund. And when I offered it and she accepted it, both of us had a little kind of couple of tears in our eyes, to be honest. Like it just meant that much. So just to make it happen and to make that big difference in someone's life. So the course is looking amazing. I love Vital. It's been an incredible transformational year for all of us that's been part of it, just to see and experience what that has been like. So it's going to just be bigger and better this time around. So yeah, applications are now open, folks. We're interviewing people, so go ahead and check that out on our website. I think, what's our website, Joe? We should have that ready to go, shouldn't we?
Let me find out, actually. vitalpsychedelictraining.com.
Yeah, that's the one. I just checked it. You got it, mate. And
you can get there from psychedelicstoday.com up top as well. So, not to make it too much of a commercial, but what's the reason somebody might jump into Vital?
Yeah, so I'm pitching it to folks that they've got a semblance, a strong calling into the psychedelic medicine space, into their kind of inner journeying space as well, that they're willing, and they've probably already started exploring self and kind of working on their own stuff, and it's giving them a calling around their career, but around just how to take steps around the skills that they want to gain. So it's pretty experiential, skills focused, not too theoretical. So they want to devote at least 3.5 hours a week of lectures and study groups. They want to go on retreat. They want to write process papers as well. Just really going into that. I think I could think of it as not a cocoon, but a crucible. Like, I like the word crucible. So it's kind of a melting pot with amazing students from all over the world. Just to go into a crucible of reflection, transformation, of absorbing, but everyone's going to come out slightly a bit different. So our cohort is incredibly diverse, which is itself is an amazing learning experience, because the more homogenous a cohort is, I think the less we get from just being around people very the same as us. So not with Vital, like everyone is all over the world and different kinds of personal experiences with psychedelics. They're doing different kinds of work, and it's, yeah. So I'm just loving it, mate.
That's fantastic. Yeah. So you, Kyle, Johanna, a bunch of others on the team have been really driving it, and I'm just watching, and I just love the feedback that we've been getting on it, and I'm endlessly pumped on that. And other things, Convergence, everybody, March 30 through April 2 in Los Angeles. We're hosting our first ever conference. It's going to be extraordinary. Something like conference meets festival. And I like saying, David, it's like it's not like a conference, it's not like a festival, it's more like a psychedelic experience. It's something in the middle. We're obviously not giving out substance to anybody, but it's how do we create a more, psychedelic culture forward environment and that we're all comfortable in, and then invite new folks in to try it out, try it on for size, have great conversations with folks. And we're going to make a lot of really good room for conversation and networking and experiences of different kinds. And I just love the fact that we're getting Carl Hart and Hamilton Morris to show up. It's going to be so fun. And many others. We're going to start naming names real soon. I promise everybody. Yeah, we're working on it on the back end. And that's going to be great. And then also we've got this microdosing masterclass with Adam Bramblage from CEO of Flow States Micro on sale at Psychedelic Education Center. Jim Fadiman helped design that one. It's really awesome. And go check that one out if you want to, really master microdosing. Yeah, so it's probably enough as a forward. And yeah, I guess I've just been having a lovely time teaching Navigating Psychedelics. It's been going so good. I think you'll be joining a few courses. You helped a ton with the programming there. And yeah, Kyle helped me kick it off. Yesterday I was teaching with CJ Spotswood, who wrote this microdosing book. What's it called? The Microdosing Guidebook. I had to look at my shelf. And he was stellar last night, and we're going to do it again tonight in class. I can't wait. Awesome. So that's what's been going on for me, other than getting over a cold, and now I'm not traveling a bunch, so really pumped to be home and getting cold again. So let's dig into some articles, David. So you identified some really great material. So the first one I want to get into is this Chacruna article about I think it was the first ever study on epigenetic change. So like methylation?
Methylation
in people. Yeah, so like gene expression, etc. in humans. I don't know that we have evidence of like trauma-inducing epigenetic change in humans and that getting transmitted to progeny. We do have animal evidence, though. We have it in mice for sure. So what's going on here is, can we kind of heal this and stop passing it on? And is there kind of like a biological marker of some kind, like a physical marker of some kind, right? Or how did you interpret this, or where do you want to start with this thing? Or maybe let's give the title of the article first.
Yeah, let's have a look. So this was an article called Ceremonial Ayahuasca in Amazonian Retreats, Mental Health and Epigenetic Outcomes from a 6-month naturalistic study. So it was naturalistic, not a randomized control trial. And it had an amazing bunch of people that were writing. It was published in Frontiers of Psychiatry, the journal, and then Chacruna did kind of, a write-up on it. November 25th, that came out on Chacruna. And the people that wrote it were Simon Ruffell, who's awesome, and Celia Morgan. So folks from King's College London, Exeter University, University of the West of England in Bristol, and the Interdisciplinary Cooperation for Ayahuasca Research and Outreach, ICARO, in Sao Paulo, Brazil. So I just love that it was that collaboration between East and West, or kind of Brazil and England, doing just naturalistic, real research.
Siddhartha Ribeiro's name on there at the very end, out of Brazil. I know he's an ally of Chacruna, so we did an amazing podcast with him. I thought we were going to be best friends after our podcast, but he's an incredible researcher down there doing really cool stuff. But yeah, let's keep going.
Yeah, and so what they did a pretty tight statistical study looking at a bunch of different indicators and measurements, including the Beck Depression inventory, the State Trait Anxiety inventory, and others. And they did those before medicine, just after the final ceremony in the Amazon, and then 6 months later. And from what it looks like, Joe, all the indicators said improvement, both directly after the final ceremony on the retreats, and then 6 months later as well, that improvement was sustained. So that feels really significant to me.
And so was that like subjective reports, or was that like blood markers? Like
no, that was so they did I
guess not subjective, it's kind of like a measure.
Yeah, they did saliva tests. They did have a bit of a problem, I think, with some of the methylation.
Yeah, they reported one failure in the test, so they kind of had to throw that one out.
Yeah. But yeah, these were all kind of scoring tests, like almost questionnaire surveys that they got that data on. That's
great. Yeah. So Yeah, so naturalistic, everybody, you've hopefully heard that term on the show before. Again, David said it before, but it's not an RCT. It's kind of real world use case. So like you could look at a festival or how people smoke DMT at home, or in this case, how ayahuasca is done in certain regions. And this looks like it was probably a single site, right? Or do you think it was like Pan-Amazonian or Pan-Peruvian?
Pan-Amazonian. I think it was probably a single site. They said they had 63 people in the group.
Right. That's a pretty good number. Yeah. So I would imagine it was over the course of a few retreats at a single center, but I didn't, running through it, see the individual site.
There was an interesting point at the end, Joe, about memory. And I think I interpret it from a narrative therapy perspective as well. Like, what memories do we have in our life, and to what extent are they objectively true or subjectively, emotionally, socially constructed? And so it's talking about working with people and trying to measure their autobiographical memory, and how that changes throughout life, and including from using ayahuasca and measuring it 6 months later. And I feel like that taps into some of the work with MDMA for PTSD. That kind of how our sense of our past changes. We can look at it and feel into it differently. And looking at epigenetic changes in intergenerational trauma, that's a lot of what Rachel Yehuda's has been doing as well, looking at methylation. But just from a psychotherapeutic and a kind of a body soma perspective, there's just so much that is stored within us. And you'd probably know as well from the breathwork space, Joe, that intergenerational piece that gets tapped into.
Yeah, like how do we want to talk about that? So I was reading some article recently, or there was a webinar somebody put on about like I'm going to butcher the phrasing here, but it was like how to decolonialize therapy or something. And you actually bring in intergenerational trauma into the room. And that was one aspect of it. I forget the rest of it. But there is this, kind of memory, right? Sigmund Freud, I think, said one of the most hopeless groups of people in therapy were the Irish. And he was coming not too far after, pretty substantial genocidal, like a couple hundred years after some pretty brutal things, not to mention the potato famine, etc. So like, this was pretty early, like right at the start of therapy as a thing in the modern world, somewhat contemporary world, that this whole intergenerational ancestral trauma thing came up. And now are we aware? Like, are we bringing this in? I think that's a really important question. We should be more aware of people's kind of genetic backgrounds, I think, because I tend to think that informs a lot of how people see the world. And, with this kind of mouse epigenetic thing we were talking about before, methylation, I think there is genetic memory that, tells us we should be afraid of certain things. And, I think not even just afraid, but traumatized by certain things.
Yeah.
Yeah. You have any thoughts on that aspect?
Oh God, I've got so many thoughts. Yeah. So I don't want to go down a Jewish path too much, because I know I talk about it a lot, but just, my whole life was filled with so much trauma from my family being refugees from Germany, and the vast majority of them being murdered in Germany. And I've just been thinking a lot about being a kid lately. I don't know what made me think about it, but it just fucked me up. Just my inability to comprehend what happened to my family, and the lack of it being spoken about, and yet knowing that it was happening. And I'm sure, it's embedded in my DNA, in my soma. I can feel it in my nervous system at times, and it comes out in experiences with psychedelics and cannabis, and the kind of archetypes that I'm kind of haunted by at times. So, where does that live? And I guess spiritually speaking and transpersonally speaking, we are souls in a body, and the body will kind of pop its clogs eventually pretty soon. They don't last too long, these little suits of skin and all the rest of it. But the soul, that just keeps going, keeps absorbing experiences. And I feel like, God, we've absorbed a lot as a race. Over the last 100 years, we have just been like, what's it called when you stick the fire hose up your ass or up your mouth? I don't know. But we've just been absorbing and just taking all this stress and trauma and fear and pain globally, internationally, historically. The last few hundred years have been bloody hell, intense. And I think we are all feeling that now. We're kind of reaching this tipping point where we're feeling, ancestors and generations of it just pouring out of us.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, this is like I'm sort of fire hose. So thank you for that. So yeah, like what is this thing? And from my frame, like I don't love to get super specific on the transpersonal. I like for people to do that for themselves. Like what's the structure of the transpersonal? But there's something there, and people should be looking at it for sure. And yeah, I just say the body has a very good memory. And this stuff, like everything that's happened to you, even if you're under anesthesia for a surgery, like that's all stuff that the body remembers that your conscious mind may not. And this stuff will come out eventually. And yeah, where does it come out and how does it come out? And, it would be an actually really interesting study, David, to do kind of like, say we look at, did maybe a 20-person study comparing ayahuasca subjective reports, a group of 20 Jews, a group of 20 Irish people, a group of 20, refugees of assorted categories, maybe in the recent, like 30 years. And like, what does that look like? And, what can we learn in the margins of those studies to like help inform further kind of like transpersonal and or epigenetic research in psychedelics? I think that'd be really fascinating. I hope somebody's thinking about these things. I bet there are folks thinking about this. We're not in a position to do research yet.
I'm sure Rachel Yehuda is thinking about that exactly, because there's different population groups and demographics that have particular experiences of trauma. But yeah, what if we were to bring those kind of trans demographic populations together? And that was what one of the ayahuasca research, I think Natalie Ginsburg was part of, around Israeli Jews and Palestinians sharing
kind of
ayahuasca
reconciliation
together.
There, I think. And that was really good. And that actually mimicked an interesting thing. I don't know if you heard about this one. Maybe you have. Yeah, you read The Way of the Psychonaut. You probably covered this one. But late Cold War, I think it was 60s or 70s, Groff and a number of others convened a Soviet-American scientific exchange of sorts by getting, top scientists to come together at Esalen and do holotropic breathwork together. And there was a lot of cross-cultural understanding that developed. And, like mortal fear on both sides probably of each other. and after doing breathwork for, a week together, they really, built a lot of common ground. I could probably learn from that myself. But
right.
Yeah, so like what do we do with that, and where do we go? I think we should try to do more of that. I think people are trying to do more of that. I would say, given global legal status, we're just not going to learn about a lot of it. It's going to be really quiet. It's going to be happening in the margins and not be in a published paper. Right? Yeah.
And I had one other point that's slightly tangential, but I just want to give a shout out, Joe, to our friend Joe Tafor, because reading this article made me think about his work. And right now, actually, I'm reading his book, The Fellowship of the River.
Pretty sure he was super involved in this, right?
Was he?
I heard him mention a few times this study in the past. I didn't see his name too many places. But sorry to cut you off. You're reading Fellowship of the River?
Yeah, and I'm just looking
good.
at oh my God, I'm loving it. I started reading it in Costa Rica, and since then I'm back down to my normal 3 pages a week. But in Costa Rica, I got through like 8 chapters. It was amazing. So yeah,
I feel like that's a good kind of transpersonal primer in a lot of ways. So like, hey, look at this. This is a really interesting character who had a really interesting set of experiences. Both seem wildly valid in his lived experience. So what do we do?
Yeah, and it was Joe's experience as a Colombian American and his own anxiety and his kind of, his body expressing that, like he's just ill and going out, leaving med school or taking a break and going to the jungle and healing, and then becoming a healer himself. And each chapter after that becomes a story of patients or just people that came to the retreat center in the Amazon for healing. And there was one chapter about a person that came with substance use disorder, chronic, I think it was cocaine addiction, and he relapsed again and again, even after his experience in the Amazon, but his relapses were less intense. They didn't last as long, and he's done a lot of healing and integration work, like around lifestyle change, different group of friends, doing yoga and meditation and being out in nature. This person that, had really tried everything and nearly died quite a lot, that ended up going to the Amazon. So that book's really starting to help me understand what this medicine ayahuasca is like, and the different illnesses that it can cure, and just the wellness that it can spring forth. And it's not just for sick people.
So you had a lot of your career doing addiction work, right?
Yeah.
So like, what does that look like? So say somebody relapsed but less severely. Like, was that a failure in your mind, or like, what does that look like when you're in the clinic?
Yeah, addiction's very politicized, Joe. I love it because there's huge potential for transformation, and it's very life and death, and people are often really raw and honest and open to, like, just help me, please. Like, I keep fucking up, or I'm in so much pain. What do I do? Like, I want help. So that's a really amazing group to work with, to kind of meet them where they're at and to go there. But the political piece is often around, just the abstinence only, and that recovery means, no drugs. And sometimes, in AA 12 steps groups, and some, not all, that means, no psychiatric meds, or no Suboxone or methadone, and no psilocybin or ketamine as well for depression or for whatever it might be. So it really has created a lot of confusion and conflict around what's the outcome we're looking for. It's not sobriety. We're not trying to be Puritan, priests and nuns here. That's not the outcome of our life. That's not our goal. It's trying to be
America
happy.
was founded by those Puritans.
But we're trying to, I really feel like psychedelics, and particularly work of Rick Barnett, who's in long-term recovery himself. He's been on the show a few times, and he has spoken about, addiction and psychedelics having potential to cure addiction and to help people stay in recovery, whether that is full absence or not, and there's the whole California sober piece. God knows, what that's like. But I can tell you, man, alcohol is a toxic liquid. My body is no longer enjoying it. Like, I'm very rarely drinking it, and I feel like as we start to move away as a society from alcohol and alcohol abuse, which is rife, I think cannabis in particular is going to be just a lot more deeper, nurturing medicine that we will build relationships with collectively as a society over the next few decades.
Yeah, in my house we call alcohol caveman drugs, and we still drink once in a while, but I never I can't remember a time in recent history that I was like aiming to get drunk, and I'm certainly much better for it. Being Irish, Scot English, I have some of that in my genes, right? Certainly have alcoholism in my recent past, personally too. So like, it's interesting. I never identified as being in recovery even, I remember one moment where I was shaking and sweating and going, I have a problem. And then, I haven't really had that moment since. It's interesting. I'm sure, people that had real problems, it's a totally different lived experience.
Yeah. It's horrible getting to know folks that have lost everything and relationships are just gone. And often they've got really significant medical issues all over, particularly from alcohol. God, what alcohol does, it just pickles your insides, teeth, your eyes, gout, everything, intestines. It's and just to what you were saying about knowing that you've got a family history, Joe. So I don't know if that's a part of what you were talking about, but we're looking at intergenerational, genetics here, and addiction is there's a massive correlation, like at least 50% seems to be genetic, intergenerational.
Yeah. So let's do a little bit of a rundown on this this study again. So it did all sorts of inventories, right? So the Beck Depression Inventory, the State Trait Anxiety Inventory, Self-Compassion Scale, Clinical Outcomes and Routine Evaluation Outcome Measures, Sentence Completion for Events from the Past test. And so overall, it's really exciting to see that we're starting down this path of epigenetic research here. And I think there's also soon to be a bunch of research on gut biome coming out, which I'm also really excited about. As we know, gut biome's wildly important and has implications on so many different disorders, behaviors. So it's going to be really interesting. And there's a graph thing here. This is like, gut biome from birth. Like you're kind of set up based on how you were born with a lot of different kinds of behaviors and gut biome related things. Not even gut biome, just whole biome. Yeah.
And the differences between,
right?
In vaginal birth versus cesarian, there's quite a lot of variations in experiences there, statistically speaking. I think you'll know probably more than I do around that, but there's quite a bit of research that's looked into that. Yeah,
and I was emergency cesarean, so I have like a different experience, right, from the majority. So yeah, it's fascinating. For whatever reason, I don't hit all the check marks for the possible failings, disorders coming from C-section, but it's I don't know. People should just think more about do you actually want a cesarean birth and why, and is it worth it? Personal decision for sure. It's just think about it and learn first, maybe, is what I'll say. Yeah, because I don't want to be the guy telling people what to do. It's just think a little bit more. That's all. Yeah. In some countries, I think it's like coming up on 50% of births being cesarean, and I think that's Lenny Gibson had the line, it's the largest ever uncontrolled scientific experiment on the planet, or psychological experiment on the planet. Is how many cesarean births can we have? So it's fascinating. I love thinking about it. I just found out recently that there are a lot of folks working on perinatal psychology. I thought it was a totally abandoned field, but it looks like it's there as a field. And so I'm really excited about that.
Any places in the world where they kind of tend to be located or collaborating?
I think UK and US is what I recall. But I don't know much more than that. I would have to do a whole bunch of stuff. But we honestly should do a whole segment on this in the future, try to get some guests on who are more expert in this, because for those that don't know, Grof's one of his biggest contributions was this whole concept of the birth perinatal matrices and these ideas of the different phases of the birth process being wildly impactful on the psyche of the individual. So I think it tracks. I think it needs to get updated a bit, but I think it, for the most part, from a general concept, works out really well. And it's the constricting phase, the oceanic consciousness phase of gestation, and and these things all have poles, right? And there's some Joseph Campbell hero's journey stuff mixed in here, so it's fascinating, right? This is your first experience as a biological entity encountering things that feel archetypal forces interacting with your biological entity. So they set the tone for a lot of the rest of your experiences. I can't say in its entirety, and I won't go that far, but it's a big influence.
Yeah. No, I'm loving learning more about it, hanging out with you and Carl. Thank you. All right, should we move on? Anything else on that article, Joe, that you wanted to dive into?
Oh, no. I think let's go on to this next one. We've got enough time to chat about this one.
Cool. Yes. So I'm happy to tell you, folks, this is a double-blind article that came out, I think, a couple of weeks ago in November. It's titled "Why the Psychedelic Renaissance is Just Colonialism" by Another Name. So catchy, provocative title, and there's quite a few parts of this article that I like that I think we can hopefully quote as we dive into it. And just this concept of psychedelic renaissance, I tend not to use it, Joe. I don't know, even the word psychedelic.
What term do you use?
Oh gosh, lately.
I like resurgence.
Yeah.
But yeah, Renaissance is not really something I use. Renaissance was an interesting period in European history, but like, is that this? When you use that term, it makes it feel like this.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's actually part of what the authors, so they're Alnor Lada and René Sousa, talk about the etymology of the word Renaissance and the history of it, to say, well, it can't be a Renaissance because we're coming from, histories of, genocide and colonialism. So what are we renaissancing? So it's actually potentially a birth of something that is new, and who should be the owners of that. And I like this general concept of who's the owners of this psychedelic beast. That is, evolving and moving in so many different directions with different people, and there's no one owner. It isn't one entity. It's a group of players that maybe have interactions between them. But I think, loosely speaking, there's some Venn diagram circles there that don't touch too much. They're moving in different directions, kind of passing in the night. A lot of the different folks in the space and the players out there. A lot of folks they use Signal, and that's where their life is going to be, staying on the DL on Signal. Some folks are going to want to have big investors on stage and flash suits and pay tons of money, and they want to have IP and PR and all that stuff, and they're going to be their thing. But that shouldn't be the expense of other folks that are doing their hands-on healing work and doing the kind of the deep inner work, and that are really more focused on I think reciprocity and inclusion of all the different voices in the space, rather than just having the agenda being set by the rich people, basically. So that's how I feel, Joe. I've got issues with rich people and money, and do we have enough of it being shared, just as a global species, and in this country of America in particular, there's just huge inequality. And I spoke with Sherry Race on Tuesday about what Enthi is doing around insurance coverage for ketamine-assisted psychotherapy, and what kind of health insurance do we have. That's health inequality, institutionalized. So what is this psychedelic renaissance going to do if no one's got insurance for this, or no one can afford to have MDMA costing $6,000 to $12,000?
Right. It's going to be interesting. I know MAPS Public Benefit Corp has some really interesting plans there. I don't want to speak for them. We can have them on in the future to chat about that. But a few things. Like, so the article, I think at the beginning was saying, there's a couple places that psychedelics started. And they kind of missed where my tradition starts, right? My tradition started in Soviet-occupied Prague, right? Stan Grof not only lived through Soviet regime, but also Nazi occupation, right? So it's kind of a different frame, right? He had to illegally read Freud. Like, he could have gotten big shit for reading Freud, even. So it was banned by the Nazis, or not the Nazis, sorry, the Soviets. So it wasn't materialist enough for them. So it was subversive in that way. Anyway, so I had a little bit of an issue there, because my tradition comes from LSD and then holotropic breathwork, which is a somewhat novel invention informed by a few other things. So there's that. So I'm a little confused and feel out of place in a lot of these arguments. So I'll put that out there. I understand, like Gordon Wasson wasn't like, super awesome player, super helpful maybe to the whole scene. So there's that. He certainly did a bunch of harm to Maria Sabina and the traditions there. If we look at that history, and, like, we have to be aware of things like biopiracy. We have to be aware of things like the Nagoya Protocol. I think we need to do a whole episode on Nagoya Protocol, by the way, because it's really misunderstood. And, intellectual property as a whole is super misunderstood, right? I come from like the software music piracy world, like information is free, kind of like a weird anarcho software thing. Like, that was my orientation for a really long time. So I kind of have that orientation, but I also understand, like, if IP doesn't exist and there's no penalties, then no money will go into research from private pockets, right? And like, what do we do? Is it worth it? Or like, how could we structure this otherwise? Like, the feds aren't putting a dime into psychedelic research really at this point. Like, Psychedelic Medicine Coalition is trying to get them to put money into psychedelic research, but where is that money coming from? And like, MAPS did an interesting thing. They made a nonprofit, and they realized they couldn't do the whole thing as a nonprofit. They needed capital. So they made the Public Benefit Corp, right? That's probably going to be quite profitable. And that feeds back into equity. Like their structure should feed into, getting people free access and lower cost access as part of their, plan. It's baked into the contract, right? So I think that's important. And then there's going to be more psychedelic research funded as a result of that, which I think is also really good. So yeah, on the other side, like, aggressive patent grabs, and unfair patent grabs, like, obviously there's something there. Like, is this kind of like, so we have the health insurance piece. Like, obviously there's kind of like a caste system in terms of healthcare, right? Like when I was working in software, I had amazing healthcare. At Psychedelics, I don't have amazing healthcare. And so like, what is that? And that's, it's kind of an unfortunate side effect of entrepreneurship in the state of the country, right? I don't know what to say about that. We had some interesting comments after the Anthea podcast on one of our social posts about it. They're like, this is really dystopian. I have to be a good worker so I can get my chemicals, to help me continue to be a good worker. And I'm like, it's a really short-sighted way of looking at it. But yeah, like psychedelic people want to see the world change dramatically, but like, what do we do? Like, what's the path forward? And I honestly, sincerely asking that. Like, I don't think it's violent revolution. I don't think we should do that. I think we should continue to try to be kind to each other, and try to understand each other. But like, I don't necessarily see that happening in this group that's kind of like pushing against this whole movement and development. For what it's worth, I always want there to be a robust black market, gray market. Like there's always going to be one, and I will, as as much as I can, try to support it. Yeah,
I'm torn as well. I've obviously focused on scaling to as many people as possible. There's millions of people right now that could probably benefit from psychedelic medicine, or just good psychotherapy, or just good, yoga and body work, that currently don't have the time or the money to do it. And one thing the article was talking about is so much of I think our consciousness is built upon foundations of structural inequality, of colonialism and white supremacy. So the way that we're approaching psychedelics, conceptualizing them as this renaissance, is inherently flawed. The article saying, because in a sense we're part of that reality that is built upon inequality, injustice, and genocide and environmental destruction. And they actually used, Joe, right at the end of the article, this very powerful analogy that, in a sense, our society is almost like it's end-of-life care, like a hospice. So it says, I'll just read the quote out. It says, perhaps our roles are to learn how to be hospice workers, helping to transition the world away from obsolete ways of knowing, being, and seeing, rather than taking on the old roles of missionaries of market expansion. So what skills will be required to become well-versed in hospice modernity? What will we have to unlearn from the dominant culture of destruction and the relentless promise of progress as an arrow? So really deep, like, questions we need to ask ourselves, like our own inner work individually and collectively, like, and just environmental destruction comes into, and the inequality and injustice that is just rife and hasn't ever stopped. It has always been here. So we've got to talk about that. So I really like that ending to it.
So what do we do with that, right? So this has been a movement in the San Francisco Bay scene for a while and elsewhere. It's kind of like, there's no hope. Let's just be able to emote sorrow to each other so we can at least get it out. And we have a collective understanding that the planet's going to die and there's no hope. Like, that's been a movement for a long time, right? That's certainly psychologically helpful for some people, but it's not really all that super beneficial to actually, for the project of humanity, keeping the planet going. Like my when I get grandiose, I say things like the most valuable thing on the planet is genetic diversity, right? And we're losing that at an accelerating rate. Totally. And yes, the market as such, the way we want to just generically say that, is partly responsible for it. People want mahogany and cheap beef, right? They want to burn the rainforest at accelerating rates to, get great returns. So obviously it's a big deal. But how does that relate to how many sick people are out there, and are we okay to keep those people sick for longer Like, how many grandmas need to die in like horrible existential despair as we hit pause to like get our shit together as a culture. And like, you know, how many people with PTSD need to keep it, you know, no, let's put a plug in that. You're going to keep that PTSD so we can get our culture together. Like, isn't there a way to do both? Right? Like, MDMA is available. It's relatively cheap. It's not $2,000 a gram. You know, LSD is relatively cheap. Mushrooms are relatively cheap. So this is why I think it needs to be a play of black, gray markets and above ground markets. We need the university research so we know what we're doing in the underground is right and helpful. You know, it's a plurality approach, I think, is what I want to see. And we need, like, you know, yeah, what do we do? Like Buckminster Fuller, Kyle and I talk about him a little bit too much probably, but the idea being it's a lot more energy efficient and probably more effective to create those new systems and attract people to it. That's why things like Burning Man are really interesting. And like just experimenting with new ways of being is really interesting. Like, do you really need to buy a new car every year? Do you really need, you know, to fly to Bali every single year for your vacation or whatever, you know, it is that's super expensive and super hard on the planet? Like, what are those more environmental things? And this is why, you know, the Burning Man org is, I think, trying to push people towards more regional burns.
Okay.
So like, let's not drive everybody to Nevada every single year. Like, let's find one that's close to home for you and you can build more local community instead of your community being spread off around the world, right? So we need to do permaculture thinking. We need to do regenerative agriculture thinking. We need to explore like new ways of group behavior, group psychology. And, you know, I'm going to evoke a name that's going to get me in trouble, and I'll do it anyway. But Daniel Pinchbeck, in his book, How Soon Is Now, writes about this really interesting commune in Portugal that's doing very interesting commune work called Tamera, Tamera, maybe. Check them out at some point. They turned a desert into a paradise. You know, lush stuff there. So I think the permaculturalist Sepp Holzer had a lot to do there, a lot to do with that project. And the way they're interacting socially is really interesting. And I have a friend, you'll know who you are. He's doing a lot of really interesting, he got bored with his work at the university. Now he's doing stuff around new ways of groups being together. So he's doing kind of a global survey of groups. And how are you guys doing it? How are you doing it? And what's optimal? Maybe not what's optimal, but like how just different groups are doing it so that we can have a playbook for new communities. And, you know, I think we need to experiment with a lot of things here, David. Like, you know, like the nuclear family, I think, is like a toxic lie we've been sold. You know, why can't we have 20 people in our household and share resources, you know, spread that toaster and television across 20 people instead of 3 or 2.
Yeah.
You know, expenses are lower, better engagement with a community and a group.
Yeah.
You know, you feel more held, seen, all that stuff. Like probably a lot of stuff you've seen in the clinic is due to just the sick structure of culture.
Yeah, really
right?
disconnected lives. And I think just recognizing...
Is the nuclear family a big part of that? Like, I think kind of.
Yeah, and I think just the lack of community that a lot of us feel, the loneliness, just having our laptop and our cell phones as, you know, our main kind of hobby, pursuit, kind of interactive tool, being this, you know, electronics. And I think looking at the past,
dark, but you're right.
Yeah, human beings, we were in nature. Like, we were just building things, digging things, burning things, you know, making things, kind of helping and really in touch with nature, with the seasons, with the elements.
Have you seen this book, Shop Craft as Soul Craft?
No.
Check it out on audio at some point if you need a book to walk to. But it's all about, like, yeah, we're so abstracted from even our hands, you know, and our ability to do things. And so he was, I forget what his career was, but it was something, you know, highfalutin. And he decided to just open up a motorcycle repair shop. And his life became so much better as a result of just like doing manual work. And, you know, we in the West are so abstracted from doing manual work as, like, you know, it's looked down upon, right? When in fact there's a lot of soul there. There's a lot of craft there. And I grew up in construction. I grew up like doing that kind of stuff and digging holes and gardening all the time. So like to not have that now at this phase of my life is kind of interesting.
Yeah. Whenever I'm feeling a bit depressed, physical work just makes me so happy, like just raking leaves or, clearing the basement just to see, oh, wow, I just did something that wasn't a spreadsheet, that was physically, I see it and my body feels good from lifting, from, moving things around. Just to kind of remember who we are, just to get out of our default mode network and ego, and just to kind of get into the body a wee bit more. And yeah, dance is amazing for that too. I know we're kind of going off the tangent here, but
well, bring us back to this article somehow.
Let's have a think. I think just honoring and remembering our past is really important. The good, the bad, and the ugly of the past. We have to recognize all of it. There's great wisdom that we stand on the shoulders of, all over the world. Indigenous traditions, kind of Western
study
traditions,
history, all kinds of history, please.
And I guess just the word psychedelic renaissance. Ben Sessa coined that term, and the name of his book in 2012 was called Psychedelic Renaissance. He didn't get the IP over it because I actually met a bloke at a Trailblazers conference in New York earlier in the year, and he's got the IP over it. He's a very smart Californian cannabis producer. He's like, yep, I got that one. So if you're using it in any kind of copyrightable way, then you have to give him a royalty fee. But yeah, just this term psychedelic renaissance, it doesn't exist. We are building, like we are all little players, and the relationships that we're building here, the conversations that we're having, just incrementally, just building this sense of awareness about, yes, the problems, but also, yes, kind of the way through those problems as well.
And one of the ways through, and I talk about this regularly on the show, is creativity. So psychedelics aren't all about healing. Everybody wants to reduce them to ayahuasca workshops and, mushroom sessions. It's like there's so much more richness in psychedelic culture than therapy, right? There's creativity, there's festivals, there's new way of loving each other, there's, all sorts of things, all sorts of religious practices that are going to be spontaneously developing. And this is coming from the human organism, not necessarily from the plants, but or chemicals even. So what is it about human creativity that could be maximized so that we can solve the climate crisis, the ecological crisis, humanitarian crisis worldwide? Like, what if a bunch of scientists were able to, 100x solar tech and wind tech and batteries and, distribution networks and things like that, and open sourced it, like open source is something we don't talk about a lot, but even if GE got it, so what? We still got that much less carbon getting pumped into the atmosphere, and hopefully that much less coal being produced, and that much less oil and environmental destruction. Hopefully. That's the hope. I hope human creativity helps us find the way out. And I don't want us to damn humanity over past mistakes. Let's try to redeem humanity and continue to see it as like one of the more beautiful things happening. And yes, the article claims other things about different kinds of rights. Yeah, like geological diversity is a big one too. Biological diversity, massive. Like, I would love to see Earth eventually just be a big nature park with no industry whatsoever on it. And we visit when we want to.
Wow.
Yeah. So anyway, that's enough of that. But, I want to see the human soul and the human beings not have this kind of deep, deep shame about existing, right? And how do we have more joy? Every day should be joyful and blissful. And that doesn't take away the fact that, people should be, joyful maybe while doing really good, positive, beneficial work to help different kinds of communities.
Amen.
Right? And, once all this stuff gets rolled out, like, is a person in Gabon really going to be paying $12,000 for this treatment? No, not at all. There's going to be different ways that this stuff works out. And the underground already has it kind of rolling. And, let's keep learning from the underground. Let's keep learning from the above ground. And let's treat each other like humans.
Yeah.
And try to keep working forward to, preserve biological diversity, keep making human lives better, keep making the planet better, right? Like we've got a lot of work ahead of us on so many fronts. So I don't know. That's my sermon for the day.
Yeah. Do you have 5 more minutes to touch
Sure.
on one other piece of news? So,
Yeah.
and as a segue, I'm thinking around what's happening globally from the last article. It's harm reduction. What we're trying to do is reduce the harm of humans on ourselves collectively as a society and as a species and on
other
our
organisms
planet.
too, right?
Yeah, it's harm reduction kind of globally. The next article we're going to talk about is harm reduction as it applies to festivals and folks that use drugs, including psychedelics at festivals. And there's 2 different articles I'll direct you to. So one is on the MAPS website, so maps.org, and the article is called Jury Finds in Favour of Plaintiffs in Trial on Harm Reduction and Medical Responsibility. And, this is quite heavy subject, so it's about
trigger warning.
Yeah, it is. It's the other article is on Lucid News, titled "Maps Found Liable in Wrongful Death Lawsuit," and it's a really tragic situation from 2017 when a young 20-year-old died at a festival. Their name was Bailey Ybarra Gatlin, and so it's talking about this, what happened at the event and harm reduction services that were involved and kind of medical assessment and screening personnel that were involved there, what could have been done differently and who has liability over that. So we're not going to dive into the legal machinations of it, but do check out those 2 pieces. And there is something out there related to the trial and the lawsuit called a settlement and release agreement, which all parties, I believe, signed up to. It includes financial numbers in there as well. But from what I can see, Joe, it's talking about that person's experience primarily from dehydration at the Lightning in a Bottle festival. And we talk a lot about harm reduction in all realms of life. Festivals is just one of them. And so you've actually been to that festival in particular, and Lightning in a Bottle, and to Burning Man. So I wanted to ask you, how do harm reduction people and tents and services kind of function at these festivals where people are using drugs and psychedelics?
Yeah. So I can speak to it a little generally. Like I think when I was at Lightning in a Bottle this year, and I don't believe Maps or Zendo was there at all, 2 people died at the festival. Not great. But 30, 40,000 people, that's a lot of damn people. And it was a super hot environment. And yeah, like there were some harm reduction services for sure. People, hopefully have enough support or wherewithal, support from others or wherewithal to make their way to these harm reduction tents or areas. And you can, get water, you can get a place to cool down if you're overheating, you can get hopefully some sort of support services by a trained person. I think it's a net positive to have harm reduction services at festivals. I think typically one of the, the framework, the way I would love to see it happen, I think it happens in most festivals this way, is there's, the harm reduction group, but somebody with a license like an EMT or a doctor or nurse comes over, screens the person, says, yes, we don't need to bring you to the hospital. You're all good. Like, go chill out over there and go work with them. And there should always be an open line of communication between medical and harm reduction services. And I think people just need a good screening before they get sent over. And I think that's usually going to work out great. I've heard of very few cases of people getting worse at a harm reduction, scenario, right? So, how many people are so thankful about Zendo, including, I think famously Tim Ferriss even received Zendo support services at Burning Man in the past from consuming too much or dehydration or something. I was flying a little high at Burning Man one time and almost ran into Zendo to try to find all my friends and decided, nope, at 3 a.m. I should not be coming loud and boisterously into Zendo. So I had enough wherewithal to just walk away as soon as I walked in the door, which is good. But, there was people right inside getting taken care of. People could get more injured if they end up falling down or dehydrated or really scared. Like those kinds of things are real. People get so confused sometimes that, fear kicks in as a result of the confusion. Paranoia can get extreme. So, there's a lot of prevention of those kinds of things spiraling out of control. I remember the first burn I went to, it was the first time I saw it was in Vermont. I saw somebody really have an interesting kind of OD. They were all, loopy, talking a lot, talking in circles. And I think it was too much LSD and too much MDMA at the same time. And, the harm reduction people did a great job there. They just sat with them for a long time, wrote it out. They didn't need medical attention. Everything was fine in the end. I saw the person a few weeks later. Everything was fine. And, so, we go out to these crazy extreme environments like, Black Rock City or like lightning in a bottle. It's super hot there, both places. Pretty wild. Is there enough water being made available? Like Dance Safe does a really good job calling these things out. Like it's kind of a music, it's an event promoter's responsibility to be providing free water at this point in history and not force people to buy a $9 bottle of water. I think that's essential. And there's still plenty of music venues across the country that don't offer free water. And I think it is absolutely essential, given a lot of these venues oversell and people get too sweaty and too close and freaked out. So like that's harm reduction. What is harm reduction as a whole? Like it's something we need to think about. And people, there is fallout, but like the tens of thousands of people per year helped by global harm reduction services it's amazing. The Loop. Have you ever bumped into the Loop in the UK?
No.
Big harm reduction work over there. They reduced hospitalizations like crazy at some major festivals in the UK. And they presented at Horizons years ago. Like, I think it was something like 90% reduction in hospitalizations with them being there doing harm reduction and drug testing on site.
I think drug testing is a key thing, and it's such a difficult thing for a lot of festivals, events, folks that make decisions.
Joe Biden's Rave Act makes it really ugly and scary, and there's a few other probably rules as well that get in the way of us doing drug testing at concerts, at festivals, and even offering it in your city is sometimes really legally sketchy. So I'm like really happy. There's Dana Larson, who we had on the show a while ago, with a lot of his cannabis money actually does harm reduction through drug testing. So he funds his drug testing at his shops through his cannabis sales. And I just recently started poking around in the dark corners of the internet, and now there's dark markets offering drug testing services to their vendors that they will publish, which is really fascinating. It's coming. It's coming, but we have to keep pushing. We have to fight for our right to survive. These are fundamental human rights. And I find it abhorrent that we don't have safe supply, and drug testing is the least we can do to keep our people safe. Like our fentanyl test kits, test strips and drug test kits, actually paraphernalia. Like until recently in Colorado, drug test kits were paraphernalia, and you could get a charge for possessing drug test kits. It's crazy. So we've got a lot of work to do in a lot of places. Like I'm just like that double blind article. I'm disgusted all over the place too. I'm just disgusted in different areas. Yeah.
And I'm also inspired by folks that you've mentioned, like Dance Safe and Fireside as well. They're doing incredible work. We've got a few of our students are actually part of Fireside and teachers as well. And I'm connected to Pini Baumol in Israel, his Hamzan harm reduction group, and they did a webinar about kind of the Israeli rave scene, and then recently presented at the addiction conference in Lisbon a piece of data they collected, research for the Israeli government about drug issues, 1,200 people and their drug use at raves and parties in Israel. And it's really interesting to see in that poster project what some of the thinking is and decision making is of people that use drugs around, like what will they combine drugs wise, and who do they want to be around, set and setting, who do they care, like do they need to test it or not, Do they need to, and how do they choose their dose? Do they just pluck it out of the sky? And really interesting just to get a sense of some of the decisions that we make, and in a sense, what is our risk levels? But from a harm reduction perspective, I think festivals have to have harm reduction, first aid, security, and water and drug testing as some of the essentials amongst other things that are there. And also, Joe, I'm thinking training. Like one of the parts of these articles is saying that the protocols weren't being followed potentially, or the protocols weren't well known enough, or the training wasn't sufficient enough around how to identify dehydration. So, I know a little bit about what to look out for dehydration. I think faintness and dizziness and maybe talking nonsensically.
For me, you're at a festival, you just assume you're dehydrated.
Right.
But yeah, totally. Like we do need really good, robust training for harm reduction pros doing this work.
All right.
I think we covered so many issues here, David. Great work.
Yeah, you got it, man.
Yeah. So, what else? Yeah, I guess, folks, just a reminder. Yeah, Convergence coming up March 30 through April 2. Vital applications just opened up. You can get there at vitalpsychedelictraining.com or psychedelicstoday.com, and our microdosing masterclass with Adam Bramblage. Check that out at the Psychedelic Education Center. You can get there from psychedelicstoday.com. Just, join our newsletter. There's so much stuff we're doing. We're doing almost weekly webinars now with all sorts of amazing folks. We just had one on death and dying. We've got a lot of other really interesting stuff in the pipeline. So stay tuned. David, anything you want to mention?
Happy to be alive. Yeah, it's intense, isn't it? Honestly, what we're trying to do here at Psychedelic, it's intense, it's challenging, and what we're trying to birth in the world, and some of the conversations we're having, they're a bit awkward. There's conflict, and it's scary, and we can hide away from them. But actually, let's not. Let's kind of acknowledge them. Let's kind of go in there and let's try and have those conversations internally. Yeah. So I always think everything's inside.
And we're gonna screw up too. So let's not be afraid of screwing up, and let's own those mistakes and just keep moving forward and learning together. This is a together thing. Let's not fracture the movement. Let's try to, have sensible, fair, kind conversations that move us forward.
Sounds good to me. Thanks a lot, Joe. Thanks, folks.
All right. Thanks, David. Until next time. See ya.